educate, inspire, and make you think. The future is now. Topics and music that affect your life from Universal Broadcasting Network. Tune in at ubnradio.com.
Welcome to the National Safe Child Show, addressing the health, welfare, and safety of all children nationwide, because it shouldn't hurt to be a child. Here are your hosts, Tammy Stefano and Priscilla Perez.
Welcome to the National Safe Child Show, and thank you for joining us again. I want to thank the show and Tammy for allowing me to be back here again with you, and thank you for your interest and concern in this topic. Tammy will be joining us. She's coming from another show. We wanted to start the show by going over some of the different line functions of a social worker. This is a very confusing process when you become involved in, quote-unquote, the system. When you have a social worker come to your house and talk about allegations of possible abuse and neglect for your child or children. There are different jobs and there are different functions that are carried out by different social workers, and it's hard to figure out who's who in this process. We started to touch on that a little bit last week, so we wanted to begin the show by going over some of those differences so it was clear to our listening audience. Of course, the process starts with a hotline referral. Somebody will call in a referral alleging potential abuse and neglect. That referral will be screened by a person on the phone at the hotline, and then it'll be sent out to the field to what's called an emergency response supervisor. The emergency response person are the first responders. They're called ER workers. They're all social workers, but they're given specific titles based on their function. So that first responder is called an ER worker, emergency response worker. They'll take that referral, they'll go out, and they'll conduct an investigation, an initial investigation. And based on what they find, they may decide that they're going to take that referral and file a petition if they feel that it warrants petition filing because they've determined that there's abuse and neglect. If they are going to file a petition, then that ER worker, when they do file the petition, they will set a detention hearing if kids are actually removed. And if there is a detention hearing, what will occur is at that hearing, if the court finds that there's enough evidence and reason based on what they submitted, that referral will become a case. When it becomes a case, what happens is that ER worker will drop out, and then two other kinds of social workers will be assigned. There'll be a social worker called a case-carrying worker, or an FM and FR worker. There'll also be a second social worker called a dependency investigator. So there is a time in the process, very early on, if children are removed, where you have two social workers involved. You have that case-carrying worker, and then the DI, the dependency investigator. Now that DI will take that original report submitted by the ER worker in that initial detention hearing, and they'll do a comprehensive investigation, and they'll do a more thorough look at the allegations that are made in that initial report, that initial detention hearing report. And as the process moves forward, that DI is charged and tasked with the responsibility of making the most thorough investigation and look into those allegations in that detention report. So it starts with the ER, they drop out at the detention hearing, and then we have the case-carrying worker, and then we have the DI. And by the way, we also have Tammy that just walked into the room, so let's welcome her.
Thank you, Jerry. I know that you're covering some great issues. Again, I'm happy to have you here. Happy that you were here to start the show. Folks, we're working on some other filming, and we have some wonderful projects that we're working on that will soon to be revealed. And it's all based on child safety.
Terrific.
Yeah, so continue. I don't want to
Okay,
interrupt.
Tammy, we were just going over the different functions of the different jobs and the timelines for our listening audience because
Okay.
this is so confusing and complex. It's
Yes.
hard to know who's who and who's wearing what hat. So we had just gone over the three functions, the ER, and then when they drop out at the detention hearing, and then the case carrying worker, and then the DI. We were just talking about how the DI becomes involved when the ER worker drops out after the detention hearing, and they are tasked with the responsibility of doing that comprehensive investigative report on the detention hearing report.
Let me ask you something.
Sure.
Does the DI meet the family members?
The DI absolutely meets the family members.
They do.
In fact, the DI is required in most cases to have face-to-face interviews based on all the allegations that were submitted in that initial detention hearing and petition that was filed.
Okay.
So they meet the family members, they'll meet the children, they'll actually talk to the collaterals involved in the referral in the
The
case.
DI.
The DI, the dependency investigator.
So would it shock you, Jerry, if I told you that I probably, if I looked around in the cases that have come to my attention, I could tell you 50 cases where the DI and the families or children have never met?
It would not shock me because, like I said, it doesn't happen in every case. There are situations where DIs will do their investigation over the phone, where they don't meet the individuals, but they take statements over the phone
Okay.
and make all their inquiries simply telephonically.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Would they construe that as meeting the family?
They would absolutely construe that and say that, well, we met the family, we've just done it telephonically and not
Okay.
face-to-face.
Okay.
So that certainly can happen.
Okay.
They have to have a contact because the whole idea of the DI is to investigate all the allegations that were submitted in that initial report at the
Right.
detention hearing. And they have to ask about the allegations in the petition. So there has to be some inquiry regarding those allegations with individuals that are being alleged to have abused or neglected children.
What if there wasn't? I mean, what could a parent do if they suddenly, the only contact that many parents have is with social workers. And if the social worker is a bully, oh well. And in many instances, I've heard that the only way that they even find out, the family finds out that a DI is involved is through the ombudsman because they don't know where to turn. So they go to the ombudsman, and then the ombudsman says, hey, here's some different people that you can reach out to that are directly related to this social worker.
Tammy, this is one of those frustrating areas where we absolutely need to do a better job. We need to do a responsible job. And just informing the family members on who's who and what their responsibility is. We need to let them know, hey, there's something called a case carrying worker. There's something called a DI, a dependency investigator, and this is their role, this is their function. So
Right.
that they understand what their role and function is. Because it's so critically important that they know who they're talking to when they give a statement. When they
Right.
say, hey, this occurred or this didn't occur. They need to know, is that going to end up in a court report? Is that going to end up in some kind of profile that's going to be used to assess and evaluate me as a parent, as a safe caretaker?
Okay.
So we have to do a better job educating our family members and our communities.
What can we do? There's a couple of issues I want to touch on. Again, forgive me, folks. I do want to jump into some things.
Sure, absolutely.
Munchausen. I know we didn't really touch on it last show.
We touched on it a little bit. We
Very
can certainly
so
go into it more.
slightly, yeah.
Absolutely.
I want to talk about Munchausen by proxy. Let's discuss that. We have social workers. They have no clinical background. They're diagnosing these parents. What constitutes somebody who might really, since you do have a clinical background, who might really have some symptoms of Munchausen?
Munchausen by proxy syndrome, like we talked about last week, is a very rare condition.
Rare.
It's considered a form of child abuse.
Right.
It's also called medical child abuse.
Right.
And Munchausen by proxy syndrome is a condition where you have a parent or caretaker fabricating or causing symptoms in a child.
Okay.
And then they subsequently take the child in for medical evaluation.
Okay.
They'll do this dozens and dozens of times, and it'll be clear when the medical professionals examine the child that there really is no underlying cause or medical necessity other than the symptoms. And the symptoms seem to be fleeting and not the result of any permanent mechanism or real issue medically or physically. So this condition is so rare, it would be impossible for a social worker, given their limited contact, given their limited experience, given the fact that they don't have the credentials to even really understand the real underpinnings of that kind of a syndrome. They couldn't possibly make that finding.
What if they do?
If
Jerry, there's time, every case after case after case. Would they have to take their child to the doctor more than once, more than twice? Would they have to be a little fanatical, or as we used to think about it, kind of like a hypochondriac, for example, who just thinks that any little thing is going to cause illness, cause infection, cause...
It would have, Tammy, there would have to be such a great number of visits to the doctor over an extended period. It's just not the parent who's overprotective. It's just not the parent who might be a little bit OC or fanatical or overly cautious. It's so much more than that. We're talking about dozens and dozens of visits over an extended period that may span several months, a year, or 2 years. There has to be real history. So to even make that finding, you would have to have such great and accurate knowledge of all the medical visits, the findings from the medical professionals, the length of time that the medical visits have been occurring by that same parent, and to amass all that information, to have all that knowledge, and to have the ability to even ask about it. Because remember, Tammy, we're talking about medical information that's confidential. And this is confidential and only can be released by the parent. So the time it would take to even gather that information exceeds the time involved from the point of contact at that initial stage when you get a referral and the decision to make a detention. You don't even have the time to make that decision and make that finding, because gathering that information would take weeks or months. So you can't even make it. You can have a concern. You may even have a suspicion. However, that concern and suspicion does not rise to the level to make a definitive finding on this kind of a syndrome. You simply can't do it.
What if they do?
If they do, that's where you have to seek out your medical professionals, your mental health professionals that will rebut that will say, you know what?
Yeah, but how can a parent rebut it? Say they don't have health insurance. We have a lot of parents, they don't have health insurance. They've just been, and sometimes they're not even given that diagnosis, because what I've heard from other insider social workers is you're never supposed to tell the person who has Munchausen, because you could exasperate it. So now we have this other closed door, folks, this other hidden agenda, and to protect the parents, we shouldn't tell them.
You know, this speaks to the greater issue of how bias drives a lot of the decision making in these situations concerning potential removal of a child. And what you're talking about is right in line with that concern where bias takes over. Because you see a parent taking a child a couple of times or 3 or 4 times and you don't see a finding, you may have this notion in your head, you may have read somewhere or heard in a training, there's a possibility. But sadly, the way the system works is you don't need a finding anymore, it seems. You don't need hard facts that are witnessed. You don't need evidence of actual abuse and neglect. It seems as if the system, and I've been saying this, and many of my colleagues have been saying this for a long time, it really is driven by fear and CYA and crisis. Not based on facts and the truth.
And that's the real problem. That's the big problem, folks. There is no more facts and truth in the courtroom. Jennifer Ani said it very clearly. It's not a justice system, it's a legal system. But when I think about it, the legal system is supposed to be driven by facts, evidence, not hearsay. But yet, within this system, this world.
You know, Tammy, the problems that we talked about in the first show are so much greater. We just scratched the surface. When I talked about ghost authoring, human shielding, I failed to mention one other issue. One of the most important documents that is drafted in terms of removing a child is a petition.
Oh, let's talk about that.
The petition is a document that has the allegations of abuse and neglect against a parent or caretaker or caregiver.
Okay.
Well, few people understand and know this, that the petition is drafted by a department called IDC.
I want to touch on this.
Intake Detention Center.
Okay.
The folks in IDC are given the detention report that's drafted by that emergency response worker and their supervisor and possibly an administrator.
Okay.
Because remember, there's ghost authoring going on there. Well, this initial report, the detention report, is the basis of the petition, drafted by individuals in this IDC section that also never meet the people, never meet the family, never meet the children, never see them interact.
Okay. What is it called?
IDC.
IDC, which stands for
Intake Detention Center.
Intake Detention Center. Folks, you need to know that they exist. I personally had never heard of them or that label.
So this group are charged with the responsibility of creating the petition. Now, it's been common knowledge that when they create the petition, not only do they not have any contact with the actual human beings that they're drafting the allegations against, but also, and most concerning, is a practice that they will throw everything against the wall in these allegations. They will make them as indicting, with caustic language, with tough language, with such an exaggeration of the actual facts, because the feeling is that when the petition gets to court at that detention hearing, that the language will be worked.
Okay.
That there'll be a negotiation. So the thinking is, well, we're going to make the language as tough as possible and throw everything at the caregivers that we possibly can, because maybe we'll end up with 60% of it, 50% of it, 40% of it.
Okay.
So it isn't based, again, on the facts and on the truth. It's based on the belief that, well, I may not be able to get 100% of what I want, so I'll throw everything I can and hope to get 40 or 50. But Tammy, obviously that's a problem. But what happens if they end up getting 80% of what's in the petition? What happens if they end up getting 90%?
Right.
You can see a parent that could end up with allegations that are so inaccurate, that are such a departure from the truth and the facts, because the practice is, I'm going to throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. So again, we see this issue of lack of transparency, where there's not a commitment to the truth and the facts, and where the families simply don't have a chance.
What can parents do? We need to get to the nitty-gritty. There was something else that we were talking about that was very important. Give me a moment, folks, because I know this was something that I wanted to touch on. I get a lot of emails this week talking about the evaluating out.
The evaluating
out. When the case comes in, what was it? The SD.
We talked about the 4 different kinds of categories for referrals.
Right.
When they are screened by the hotline screener.
Right.
Before they get to the field.
But the evaluating out, so there's a parent, what is it called? The SDN?
There is an SDM. There is a screening tool that is used when that ER social worker comes out and does that initial investigation and makes a decision to remove or not remove a child.
Okay.
They utilize a screening tool.
Okay, that screening tool then spits out different categories: promote, don't promote, moderate, medium, high level. Is that right?
Absolutely. There are two different parts of this screening called risk assessment and safety assessment.
Okay, perfect.
So the first part is the safety assessment that's done.
Okay.
Under the SDM screening tool.
Okay, and this is all. Can we say the SDM is all multiple choice for the most part?
SDM is a series, and I brought one with me, Tammy, because I wanted to show you physically what it looks like.
And I love it.
And SDM, by the way, stands for Structured Decision Making.
Okay.
Now, in theory, this tool was introduced to help to make the choice and the process a little less subjective and more objective. However, you'll find that when you go through the actual assessment, that it is inherently flawed, and there are biases built into this assessment and this tool.
Okay.
And sometimes we rely so heavily in this that we forget the obvious fact
The
that
humanality.
the human
Yeah.
beings themselves.
Yeah.
What are we finding when we talk to the people? What are we discovering when we work with the family? What are we seeing and observing when we see the family and the children interact?
Well, it depends on who's seeing them.
Eh,
If you get a bully, they're seeing a piece of meat that they're going to gnaw into, and they've got all of this computer-generated, artificial intelligence type of mechanisms coming in and becoming mom and dad and judge and social worker and
And this is the problem. I understand that in theory, this was meant to help, but in practice, you can see where it does just the opposite. When we rely too heavily on these instruments and we start to marginalize the actual experience of the social worker and the human beings, we start to rely on instruments that have very little information and knowledge about the actual people and their interactions. And we can't really glean that from these instruments.
okay.
And that's a huge problem.
That's a major problem, and maybe it's based on what, Jerry, you preach to the choir about. There are not enough social workers out in the field to be able to handle the capacity of cases and referrals that come in, and that is a problem, folks. It's a real problem, but it doesn't take away the fact that people shouldn't have to suffer because we've got artificial intelligence that is now making a decision about the children that we bore.
Tammy, you brought up a really good point that I need to say something about, the staffing issue.
I know.
The staffing
I know.
issue.
I know.
When that tragedy with Gabriel occurred, now over a year ago,
Not yet. No, May 24th.
May 24th, almost a year.
Yes.
At the time, I was at that office, Tammy.
I know. I remember.
I worked with those individuals, and I remember at that time that the ER staff, those first responders, were down to about 62%. They were down to about 15, 17. They're supposed to be at 30. I filed a complaint with the Board of Supervisors in the 5th District, and I said, look, leadership hasn't come out to the office to address these staffing issues. Why haven't they come out? If they really care about child safety and abuse, and they care about addressing these really serious systemic problems, and staffing is at the heart of that, why haven't they showed up? Well, the director came out, and we told him face to face, we have a serious staffing crisis. And one by one, all the staff that came and we prepared for his arrival said the same thing. We're dying on the vine. We need staff. We can't keep up with the referrals. We can't help keep children safe if we don't have enough bodies. Well, do you know at the time they had 15 to 17 ER workers? Do you know how many they have now, Tammy?
No.
They have 8. They have 8.
We have a $50 million, folks, surplus within Los Angeles County for social workers.
Absolutely.
What's going on? Who? Show us the money.
How is
Where
it?
is this money? If they're complaining because children are dying each and every day, 570 children died in an 18-month period by a system that took them, in many cases, legally kidnapped them from safe and good parents, loving parents, took them away, and as a result of this legal kidnapping, in some instances, folks, these children were then murdered, guaranteed to die. And here it is, we have a $50 million surplus. Why aren't we hiring more workers? Why aren't we taking some of the stress off of the workers?
Isn't that incredible? A year later, we have a workforce, our first responders down to 8 when they should be at 30. They can have as many as 3 to 5 referrals every morning. And they're not allowed to close these referrals without meeting these incredible new requirements.
Right.
So there is no way they can keep up. Yet, publicly, we hear officials, including the director, telling us we understand the issues. We're concerned about the issues. We're addressing the issues.
Maybe somebody, I think.
A year later,
Yeah.
we still don't have enough staff simply to go out and investigate those referrals?
You're damn straight. A year later,
is that
we don't.
incredible?
Yes, it is. Jerry, we have a caller.
Yes.
Well,
Okay, they're going to call us back.
Okay.
Go ahead. I know you were on a roll.
Oh,
Stay with your passion, because this show, I really want the people to understand. There's a couple of people that when the show is over, they're waiting for me to send it over to them. This show is essential to get out this information that we want the general public to understand. Folks, it's really, really important that we address your issues. Jerry has stepped up to the plate. He's retired now. He can tell it like it is. And we need to tell them the truth.
We absolutely do, Tammy. And it's amazing. Those of us, all of us, this issue of child safety and concern touches every single human being, because we've all been children.
Yes.
Many of us have had children. We have nieces, nephews. We've been grandparents. We are all connected to child safety in some way. And we talk about the system as if it's them. You know what, Tammy? This is our system. And we need to mobilize our communities. We need to mobilize the outrage and galvanize this outrage and focus it, because we need to take back the system.
That's right.
We need the system, because
what do we
the
do?
sad truth is kids are hurt, and we have to start demanding that change take place now. We have to say, you know
But
what?
who do we demand it to?
The Board of Supervisors, we have to start there, because we all know that the individuals that really make the decisions are the Board of Supervisors. Nothing happens and nothing changes unless they give the seal of approval, unless they...
Okay, how do we push them to do that? Because I am going to tell you this. There's some parents that have been going to the Board of Supervisors meetings with evidence. When we talk about evidence, I'm talking about real evidence. I'm talking about documentation. I'm talking about fraudulent reports where they have the contradiction, which that be the truth, and they're not listened to. How do we prompt, push, pull, kick, and scream? How do we get their attention in a way that there is no other way for the Board of Supervisors but to take action? What evidence can we bring to the table that we say enough? The good social workers need to be protected, but the good parents who, listen, they didn't go to school. They didn't care about social work. They didn't care about any of that. They were rubbing their bellies and
Absolutely.
singing to their baby inside of their womb, and something happened. They got robbed. And to date, many of these people feel like, and it's a reality, their lives have been stolen. They might be existing right now, breathing, eating, drinking. Their lives are stolen. And until they get their child back, and bear in mind, and I hear parents say to me every day, the years that I've lost with my children, even when I get them back, and I'll never stop fighting, because that's what a mama bear does or a papa bear does. But the bottom line is, those years are gone.
Those years are absolutely gone, and we see that. And those of us that are parents, I have 2 kids, Tammy, and I'll tell you, if anybody took my kids, I don't know what I would do.
Exactly. What would you do, Jerry?
I tell you.
What would you do if somebody said, Jerry, you're a bad drug addict, and you know what? I think you hurt these kids, and I've got this report here, and Jerry, you better shut your mouth, and you know what? You're going to go for urine tests every week, and no. You say, no, you know what? I'm not a drug addict. I want to prove myself. I'm going to go for blood tests. Jerry, shut your mouth, because we don't allow blood tests. We make the rules. We're Hitler, and you are the hostage.
You know, you want to feel like that's an exaggeration, but it isn't.
No.
And I'll tell you, if knowing what I know of the system, if someone came to my door and accused me of that, and my kids were school-age kids, I would do everything I can to either leave and remove myself, to make sure they have no way of contacting me, because I would know the reality in the system. I would know that the odds are stacked against me. I would know of the bias. I would know that there's very little chance that this will be looked at with any level of objectivity to really assess actual abuse and neglect. And I would know that speculation and bias would take over and make those decisions. So I would be terrified. I would be scared. And I don't want to say that, but the reality is...
Of course you would be. They're your kids.
The reality, Tammy, is that PR problem that we have with the system, for valid reasons that we discuss and will continue to discuss, has actually created more harm and risk for our children, because we have a level of distrust that is off the charts. And if we can't trust the system, then that means we're not calling in to assess child abuse when it occurs. So by the very nature of its dysfunction, we have created more risk and put more kids in harm's way because we have a system that we don't trust, not just by the families and communities, but the workers themselves don't trust the system.
Right.
They know that they're going to be thrown under the bus and scapegoated. So you don't have the families trusting the system, the communities, and you don't have the workers trusting the system. So when we talk about recommendations like the Blue Ribbon Commission, when they talk about words like overhaul, we can understand we need to start over. We need to start over.
How about just destroying the whole system and just rebuilding it? How about getting outside committees in for oversight to make sure that the social workers are doing the right job? Because at the end of the day, I will tell you, Jerry, you and I and anybody else in this world, we can be the best people in the world. We're getting beat down, we're getting underpaid, and guess what? There's no oversight. Imagine if nobody ever, including, imagine if there were no driving laws. Jerry, you want to get somewhere and you can just stick your foot on that pedal and you can go 110 miles an hour because you got to, if you have a good car. And nobody's going to say anything because nobody's watching.
And that's incredibly important to talk about. Because the way the system is set up with the individual offices, and because the geographical area is so massive, going from Santa Fe to Lancaster, there is no way there can be any meaningful oversight if you're sitting in a seat in Santa Fe or in downtown Los Angeles and know what's going on in a Lancaster office.
I got 100 people. I have 100 people who have no criminal record, no drug background, professionals, degrees, that are willing to sit up, take the stand, and devote themselves to be on that oversight committee.
And we need those people, and we need...
We've got them. I've got them.
We need those, and we need actual social workers that have done the work. It's an absolute travesty and an absolute joke.
But we don't want the social workers. We want to allow the social workers to do a good job.
Right.
Because we know, again, that there are some fabulous, beautiful people that have taken on this profession. Guess what? They'll never need oversight, and those are not the people that we're addressing.
I was a social worker for over 18 years.
Did you have a lot of complaints about you?
No, I didn't.
Thank you. You know why? Because nobody complains about a social worker that's a good person, that's doing their job, whether they find them in favor of the parent or not. The parent knows what they've done, and if they've done something wrong and the social worker's calling them out on it in a professional way, listen, the parent knows. It's the parents that are pissed off right now that are saying, I didn't do anything. I'm being lied about. Who is this person that has stolen my name that I'm looking at in this report? Because that's not me.
I love what you just said, that the parent knows their situation.
Right.
They know what's really going on.
Exactly.
Do you know, Tammy, we actually had a program called Family Group Decision Making that I coordinated and facilitated for about 9 years.
Okay.
And it was real social work. This was a program where we had family conferences where families came together that they felt comfortable with. They got a chance to decide what the purpose was, and during that conference, they had an opportunity to create their own case plan without any bias,
Just to let the listeners know, this is not... Is this the same as a TDM?
No, absolutely not. This is a far cry from a TDM.
So TDM,
this is the precursor where we really did serious social work. And I'll tell you, I'm going to read some of the principles. These family conferences, and I conducted over 1,200 of them. They were incredible transformational experiences where the families got to create their own case plan privately during the conference. These were the principles, Tammy, and I'm going to read these. Families as experts, your own family as your best guide, respect for families and their cultural sensitivities and issues, families as primary decision makers, mistakes as opportunities for growth and development, resolutions are based on strengths, celebration of differences. These were the principles that drove family group decision making, a program I was involved in.
Okay.
Just to paint you a picture, we would coordinate a conference. So I would call up everybody that loved the child. We actually used the L word, something you don't read in reports.
Yeah.
We actually thought loving a human being was important and significant. So we would reach out and shake the bushes. We would get everybody to these family conferences, and we would do it when they were available. I did most of them in the evening, on weekends. I did them at their churches. I did them at their schools, their parks. I did them out of the back of my car, wherever the family was comfortable. During the coordination process, they got a chance to create their own purpose statement so that everybody was focused on why they were there. A typical purpose statement could be for the family to decide how to best support the parents and where the children should live. A typical purpose statement, but it was their purpose statement. Now, this was a family meeting, mind you, not an agency meeting.
I have some people online, not to interrupt you, Jerry,
Yes.
who are saying they've seen it all. This is old news.
Okay.
When did you put this out? When was this first?
This program sadly died probably about 4 or 5 years ago.
How long did it run?
It ran for about 7.5, 8 years.
What was it, if you know? Were there any statistics to show that it was, in fact, working?
In 80% of the time, there was an independent study done by a university, and they found that in 80 to 85% of the time, there was a positive outcome, meaning families appreciated that they had a chance during this conference to make their own plan and submit that to court. It didn't go through any filters. The plan that they created during that conference went to court. So now
there's no middleman.
There's no middleman. So the court had an opportunity to hear exactly what the family wanted to do in a way that made sense to them,
Okay.
with natural support systems that they knew.
Okay.
That was the model in the conference that I did for a number of years. It was real social work. And sadly, we have nothing on the table right now that allows the family to independently, without the fear of self-incrimination, make their own decisions and plans about how to address their child's safety issues and concerns.
I have a question.
Yes.
There are some fabulous professionals that are working on a survey.
Yes.
They want to know if, first of all, if you can really think about it from a, this is great, Jerry. If you can think about it just from looking at both sides, because I think that you have seen both sides, which is why you've written A Culture of Fear. I don't think that you would have even given it this name if you didn't recognize that something was systemically failing families and children. So I know that your heart is in the right place, and I know that your actions are in the right place. How do we implement them? How do we make change? So a group of fabulous folks. Okay, I got that question. A group of fabulous folks are implemented a survey. They're doing one now for California. Perhaps you can suggest some questions, not right now because we don't have a whole lot of time, but that you can maybe get together that might be beneficial to push forward some real change that's needed, to push forward some exposing of the failures that you and I and the rest of the parents that are suffering and children that are suffering have recognized. Would you be willing to do that?
Yes, I would. I would love that opportunity to come up with some questions on that survey.
I'm not the decision maker. It's within another group, but they're a fabulous group, and they're a fair group. And they're professionals, and they listen, but on the same token, they have seen the children dying.
And this is why we need not only the families and not only our communities, but also the people that have seen the failure of the system from the inside. We need the inside and input of both, the family and the social workers that have seen it. Because I've had this experience, I know firsthand where the failures are, and I know they're serious and urgent. So I'd love to share that insight and help to craft a survey that would really flesh out those issues so we can really talk about them.
Okay, let's do that. That's something we're getting a yes. You and I will work together and get some questions over to this group because they're really doing a fabulous job. And it isn't about pointing fingers. They're looking for solutions to save the kids. And that's what it's really all about. At the end of the day, does everybody screw up at some point in their lives? Show me a social worker or a parent who hasn't.
And that's our focus has to be the system.
Yeah.
How do we make systemic changes,
and
long-term changes that are solution-based and fact-based?
That's right.
because that's what we need, because we want a CPS system that works. We need a CPS system in every community because sadly children are hurt, but we want to make sure that we're doing it with integrity. We're doing it in a way that is fact-based with the best interest of families, the actual best interest.
Tell me something. You were a social worker. You see this report. It says high risk assessment. We're going to go back here for a minute because I know I still haven't given the one who wrote the question the answer. High risk assessment, and then underneath that you see promote. Promote means, folks, in layman's terms, as the listeners know, open up a case, investigate. There's some danger according to what the ER worker has input into the system. Over and over again, the next line you see, override by social worker. Explain that to us.
Tammy, we're talking about one of the two parts of the SDM, the Structured Decision-Making Assessment Tool. And we're speaking specifically about the risk assessment component.
Right.
This risk assessment has some serious bias built into it.
No, but I'm not even talking about the bias. Forget about all the screw-ups with this. How about a social worker that we have over and over again, that we see that little line? It says override.
They can override.
Who's they? What level?
The supervisor can override it. An administrator can override it.
Can a social worker level 1?
The social worker can override it, but then it goes through their supervisor who has to approve it, because everything has to be approved. Social workers cannot unilaterally make a decision on anything, quite literally. It has to be approved, sanctioned. There has to be a seal of approval by the supervisor or administrator or manager. So when we talk about the real decision makers, it's not the social worker, Tammy. In 99% of the cases, it's that supervisor or administrator.
And that part I get.
So that's who we're really talking about. So yeah, they can get a risk assessment that maybe comes out low, but they can override it because they have a feeling, or they have a subjective point of view, or a speculation, or a bias, or a gut feeling that says, you know what? No, I think there's a real issue here. So I think we're going to override it in either direction. They can make it more serious or less serious. It's at their discretion. Sadly, there isn't a mechanism in place that says, if you do override it, what are the facts? What is the evidence? What is the truth that they're using as a basis to make this decision to override it? That isn't built in, and there's no oversight for that, Tammy.
So what do we do? You know, one of our very loyal listeners and a loyal parent who has been robbed of her children, of the life that she once had. And by the way, and I want to touch on Indian heritage, if it's handled differently within the system.
You know, when you have Indian heritage, and there's a form that's given out by the ER worker initially,
right,
when they meet the family and they
Native American background.
Do you have Native American background? Mm-hmm. And there's a law that's in place called ICWA, Indian Child Welfare Act. And whenever there is clear evidence that there is Indian heritage, we're supposed to handle the case very differently, Tammy.
Right.
Very differently.
What does that mean? What kind of differently?
One of the most obvious differences is, with most cases, we're supposed to provide what's called reasonable efforts.
Okay.
Which means we're supposed to take every effort and make every effort to make sure that we've helped support the family, we've helped place with the children of the family, we've done everything we can so that we can avoid the removal of the family. In theory, that's what a reasonable effort means. Now, if it's a child that has Indian heritage, then it goes from reasonable efforts to active efforts. So it's basically reasonable efforts on steroids. We're supposed to double and triple our efforts to make sure and ensure that we've done everything humanly possible to help to stabilize that family, to
Why would an Indian family be? Why would such efforts be taken for one race versus another?
The legislative decisions are well beyond my pay grade, but there simply is that ICWA, that Indian Child Welfare Act, an act that was passed that is
Maybe,
law
right.
that says that we have to provide this.
Maybe because we stole the country and massacred them.
Well,
I don't know.
I mean, you could certainly.
It might be, folks.
That might have a
we
little
just
bit to do with that.
killed them all and stole something, and so now they want some rights. Okay.
So we can certainly do shows just on that issue,
that's
Tammy.
for damn sure.
And I'm sure that has something to do with it. But that is the case. But I tell you, I've been involved with cases that have Indian heritage, and we may say that we have that requirement, but the reality is you find that those reasonable efforts don't necessarily suddenly morph into active efforts, Tammy.
Right. You're saying what they're supposed to do.
Yes.
Do you believe that they really do, Jerry?
In every situation, of course not. In fact, even reasonable efforts are not really taken seriously in every situation.
Because we have some Indian heritage folks.
Sure.
And they say reasonable efforts. Are you kidding me?
Oh,
is Jerry blind or is he fooled?
No, Jerry knows that it doesn't happen.
Okay.
Jerry has worked with cases
the point.
that absolutely it doesn't happen. I worked with a high-profile case where I actually met with the representative from the tribe that tried desperately to get the court to...
I think I know about this case. It is confidential, but I was brought in for something, and it was high profile, and it didn't come out, actually, but...
No, we failed to provide those so-called active efforts each and every time. Not only did we fail to provide those active efforts, we also failed to place a child in an Indian home or an Indian tribe approved home, which is an absolute requirement when there is Indian ancestry that's been confirmed.
Who runs the ICWA? Is it a white Caucasian person? Is it an Indian heritage group that understands?
The tribes will appoint...
Not the tribes, but the social workers. I'm looking now. ICWA unit is run by a Caucasian person.
It's supposed to be someone that has Indian heritage. It's not always the case.
I mean, what's considered Indian heritage? I know where I'm from. I mean, I've got 2%. If I had 3, I would have been...
I've got 25% Cherokee.
Okay.
And I wish I had more, but the caller is right. That you may find situations where the person working for the department may not have that heritage or may not even have a lot of knowledge or sensitivity. I know ones that do. I know ones that actually work in that unit and actually have a lot of concern and are incredibly frustrated because they know the system and the court and the department.
Okay, so you just made a good point.
Aren't taking it seriously.
Incredibly frustrated. They are incredibly frustrated. So now that you've educated us to know enough, those who are incredibly frustrated are frustrated because they're not decision makers. They're not the ghostwriters.
No, they don't have the authority, and that's the problem.
Well, those people, though, we're not addressing because those people really probably haven't done anything wrong and are just as frustrated as my families are.
Absolutely, they are, and that's the point.
So we need to go after the decision makers, the ghostwriters, the supervisors, the DI workers that say that meeting a child and loving a child is making a teleconference call. No, folks. We're not putting up with this anymore. And Jerry, whether you like it or not, we're going to pull you by your ear, and we are pulling you along for this ride because we need this. We need the inside scoop because I promise you this. These children that are growing up, I'm not talking about the bad families that shouldn't have their children like Pearl Fernandez.
No, we have families like that.
Okay,
absolutely.
And we recognize
and we
that.
know that.
Make no mistake.
Yeah, no, we know
okay,
that.
we'll be the first to point them out as well.
Sure.
We're not talking about them right now. We are talking about the families that have done a good job.
And they love their children.
And they
that have worked hard to build
sleep,
a family.
They don't eat. They don't breathe the same. They don't have any life that they had before. And so those are the families that we're talking about. Where do we go from here, Jerry? I want to set up an email. We don't have a lot of time left, and time goes quick. I want to set up an email account that we can have access to, that people can just say, Jerry, here is this situation. Jerry, what do you think about this? And maybe then we set up a blog and we post information about those topics.
Oh, let's do this. Because education and providing insight about what's really going on is critically important in this process. And we need to start talking to each other. We need to start having a transparent conversation about this whole issue, and bring it out of the shadows.
Okay.
Let's talk about what's really going on to help our communities and families, because they need the help. They need the support.
Yes, absolutely. Folks, one last question. If you know for a fact that your children that just got legally kidnapped from you are then put in a home with drug addicts, active users, what can you do, Jerry? We've got a mom like this. We have several.
Well,
when I say mom, I'm talking from a maternal side. It's families, mothers and fathers.
We have to use our own resources to
There's nothing that we can do within the system.
In the system, we can file our petition. We can file our concerns through our attorneys, through our paralegals in the court.
We don't have that. We don't have any money. We're broke. We're childless. We've lost our homes. And if we did have it, we've lost our homes paying for a freaking attorney that has stolen our money and now does nothing.
Thank goodness we have attorneys that actually do a lot of this work pro bono. We know some great attorneys that are willing to come forward and help families, even if they don't have money, because they know how serious this is.
Can we give names now, or can we give names later?
We will give names later. Let's first get permission of those attorneys.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we know attorneys that care about families and want to do something about this.
Okay. All right. This is important stuff, folks. So this is good. So we have some attorneys. You know, we will build them up. Trust me. We will put them out in the limelight so that along with helping pro bono, we will get them some paid cases, so there's a balance. I believe in balance.
Absolutely.
Listen, there's people that can't afford attorneys. Don't crucify them. Don't put another stake in their hand. Let's get them the attorneys that they need. And people that do have money, don't keep your pockets zippered, because we know how to unzip pockets. Let's pull the money out of those people's pockets and give it to the attorneys that are helping.
Tammy, this is our system. Let's take it back.
Yes, let's take it back. And let's also take back the kids that have been robbed. Let's take those children. Let's put the children with the parents that night after night they're crying and having nightmares and screaming out with sweats, I want my mommy, I want my daddy, while a stranger comes into the room and tells them to be quiet and get some sleep, or they'll be leaving and going to the 3rd, 4th, or 20th foster home. And we've covered those issues.
Let's not marginalize the love between children and parents.
Yeah.
Let's not eliminate that from the equation. That bond of relationship is incredibly essential and important, and the basis and foundation to address any issue. Let's not exclude it from the equation.
They want to know. Well, folks, I can tell you, I did see the posting. Besides his book, what else is Jerry doing to go forward? Jerry is working on some things. I'm not at liberty to say. I know he's working on some things.
Tammy, I'll be up in San Jose at the end of the month with a group of community leaders, with some attorneys, to talk about this very issue. I'm going to continue to talk wherever I'm invited to speak about the need to reform CPS, not just here in LA County, but throughout the country. So I'm going to take the messages and the themes in this book, and wherever I can, speak up and provide this information and open up this discussion, Tammy, because we need to have this discussion.
We even more than having the discussion, because I promise you, Jerry, and you and I have spoken some nights where you're already in bed and I'm saying, gee, I'm only on my second shift and it's 9 p.m. and I'm getting to bed at 4, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, and you're saying, oh my gosh, you'd better get some sleep. Well, there's no time for sleep. Because we can't keep talking about this, folks. Because every day that we're talking about this and we have the freedom to get up off of this chair and to get in our cars and drive, there are other people and families that literally can't breathe.
No, we have to move at some point from talk to action, and it has to be focused. It has to make sense on a systemic level. We need to bring programs back like family group decision making that allowed families to make their own choices and their own plans with their family, familiar, and comfortable support networks. We need some mechanism that allows families to be the decision makers with appropriate and responsible checks and balances, but empower them to take care of their own, because in most cases they will take care of them, because you know what, Tammy? They actually love their children. They care about their children. And no one will love a child like their parent or their grandparent or their own family. We have to make every effort to reach out to these families, keep the child in the family until we can help the family empower themselves.
Who's Amy Pellman, a hearing officer? Are you familiar with her?
The concern?
I don't know. Amy Pellman is a hearing officer, not in ICWA, not in the ICWA unit. Took over Sobel's courtroom.
There are hearing officers within DCFS and dependency court system that hear the ICWA cases, that hear the cases that have Indian heritage. Now, they don't always hear all the cases. I worked in a case that had Indian heritage, and the case was outside of that court, specifically designed for ICWA cases, for over a year and a half. It eventually ended up in that court, but they don't necessarily deal with all of the ICWA cases, those Indian Child Welfare Act cases. They're supposed to get those cases because there's specially handling that's involved, because the laws are very different with an ICWA case.
Okay.
The standards are so much more high and more strict. So courts need to have that kind of knowledge and expertise to make sure that DCFS is complying with the letter of the law regarding how we deal with and handle families and support families when there's Indian heritage.
Okay. Indian heritage. Let's move on to one last subject. We have 5 more minutes.
Sure.
Family law. You and I spoke about this.
Family law.
Folks, we know there's thousands of people across the country. They're in family law court. There's allegations of abuse. DCFS, DHS, DCF, or whatever label that each state is given. In this case, DCFS gets involved. And the allegations sometimes show bruising, black eyes, forensic exams, you name it. Are DCFS cases handled differently when a social worker finds out that either one of the parents that alleges the abuse is in fact in the midst of a custody divorce dispute? Just a yes or a no?
Yes, it does happen that in some instances there is a bias that sets in when you hear family law. That
Right.
Immediately you may think, okay, well this is a custody case, and I've seen this 100 times. Therefore, I don't have to be as focused or concerned about the possibility of actual abuse or the absence of it, because I have this family law situation. So sometimes we see that bias set in, and we may not take it as serious as we need to or investigate as thoroughly, or the opposite may be true, simply because it has that tag or label of family law. And that's the problem when you have a system that isn't held to a higher standard when it comes to the facts, that you can have a bias like family law that may dictate or prejudice or bias someone's observation or perception of the situation.
So they're not going to investigate the same, because you said the word the other day, and you couldn't have been more accurate. They have a preconceived, if you will, belief that potentially this might be a vindictively motivated allegation, just to ensure that one parent over another gets the custody, wins the custody battle.
And that's
Would that be accurate?
Absolutely. And that's the problem when you have a system that doesn't require and mandate facts as the basis and foundation for making decisions. That's what happens when you have a system that says, just in case, there's a possibility, so we better do A and B. Instead of a system that says, you know what, we're not even going to look at the possibility of removal until we have facts, until we know the truth, until there is evidence to support what should be the measure of last resort.
I asked you the other day, when you look at these multiple choice questions, the first questionnaire that's filled out to determine a yay or a nay, an open case or a closed referral, I asked you, do you think that it is good to continue to have this question on there? Is this family involved in a family law case? And you said no. Take it out.
No, of course not. And there are other questions in the screening tool that's used, that
Such
SGM
as?
tool. There's one question that says prior investigations, and you have 4 choices, Tammy.
Okay.
You have none, 1 or more, 1 or 2, or 3 or more.
Okay.
Now, let's say you have 1 or 2 prior investigations.
Okay.
It doesn't ask you what the disposition of the investigation was.
Okay.
What if they were all unfounded? It's not asking that. It's simply
So
saying.
what does this give a preconceived belief of?
If you have two investigations, but they were unfounded because you're in a custody situation and there's retaliation.
I mean, you just
there's a lot
said
of,
something.
And oh my goodness.
Wait a minute.
Now,
You just said because they were unfounded because there was a custody case. This is what's happening, Jerry. You just hit the nail on the head.
now
If it's a custody case, are these investigations, regardless of the evidence, often labeled as unfounded?
there's a bias, and there's a bias that will create a real misperception about the real happenings and what's really going on. And our screening tools really encourage this bias. There are other questions in the screening tool that don't ask for an explanation of what took place, just that it took place.
Jerry, if it comes back unfounded because there was a lack of investigation, because you looked, not you, the person, the social worker looked, saw one or two referrals, it comes back unfounded. Unfounded. Let's think about another label given to the parent who is alleging and fearful of the child's life or safety. What is unfounded? Let's put another word on unfounded that the courts recognize. Could we say liar? Would it be fair to say they lied?
Oh, absolutely.
Would it be fair to say that they made a false allegation?
Clearly.
Unfounded is considered the same as false allegations. So, folks, we have figured it out. Allegations of sexual abuse, you're in family law court. There is a fraction of an investigation done. Why? Because they already have, Jerry confirmed it, a preconceived notion that, yes, there's a family law court case, there's already a motive, okay? So now you've got the motive. It comes back unfounded. Guess what the family law court sees? And guess what one of the component is that we've been discussing for years? Why, when the person making the allegation is the one almost to be guaranteed to lose custody? The answer is it came back unfounded. And unfounded, Jerry, is the same as what?
Untrue.
Untrue. Liar. You're a liar. You made a false allegation. Why? Because you're motived to gain custody, when in fact it should have never been that way.
You know, Tammy, in my book, A Culture of Fear, I cite two examples where the failure to have any allegiance to the truth and the facts harmed a family. I have an example of a situation where we tried to protect children from a grandparent that was going to abscond with the child, simply flee the country, and we knew that. And this grandparent was incredibly unhealthy, but because we failed to look at the truth and the facts, we failed to protect that child. They were subsequently absconded and taken out of the country, and the mother has no contact. In the second example, we have a situation where because we failed to insist on the truth and the facts and make decisions on the truth and the fact, we ended up removing a child and children from a family, and did it several times. So in both situations and scenarios, you can see where the failure to rely on and demand the truth and the facts harms children in either situation. It harms them because we fail to keep them from unhealthy family, or we fail to choose a decision that resulted in removing children from a family situation. So truth and facts are critical, and on both sides of the balance sheet, Tammy.
Yeah,
on both sides.
That's for sure. Folks, if you allege abuse, is there another entity? I can't find one for the life of me. We need somebody else that we can turn to if we have concerns about our children. Is there anybody else out there besides this fraudulent, lying, failing, child murdering system that we don't even know what their names are because they're ghostwriters? Where else do we go?
Well, we certainly have to bring those people out of the shadows, because they've been in the shadows far too long.
Let's bring them out.
And we need to demand those challenges that I made in the first show, that we need to have somebody from the department show up at a show, maybe come and sit with us and
Jerry,
answer.
can you make that happen?
I can certainly ask.
I'll give up my seat. I don't need a camera.
Can certainly
I would
reach
love
out
to
and
put
say,
them here.
I'd love to have somebody sit down next to me and say, okay, how can we address these systemic issues? How can we address very simply, very plainly, this whole notion of ghost authoring and human shielding?
But we don't want
that
the
we've seen
bureaucratic
forever?
red tape,
No,
because
we
my
want someone-
parents have heard it all.
No, we want someone that actually has the authority to take a serious look and not just say, you know what, I'm going to have my managers look at that. We don't want someone that comes and says that, because obviously we know that's going to go nowhere.
Right.
Because these departments and these offices act like little chieftains, and there's no oversight. We need somebody that actually has the authority.
Give me a name. We'll
You know,
start working on. Do you have one yet?
I'm going to put some thought into who we
Okay.
can reach out and ask to come
Okay.
on board and talk to us. Let's
That's
start
still
talking
employed?
seriously about this. That's still employed, that's still
Okay.
working, that would have some influence
Okay.
and some ability to say, you know what, I know the practice and we need to do something about the practice, and you know what, let's start talking about it honestly.
Yes.
Because we know what's going on.
Jerry.
And we know it from every individual that works in the system.
That's right. Jerry, at the end of your employment, okay, and this is really important because I asked you this, I felt it. Did you feel any pressure towards the end because you were coming out, because you wore a whistle, because you had made a decision that you had had enough, and you held your whistle up and you said, I'm going to become a whistleblower because I've had enough, because I've seen enough, and it's getting pretty damn ugly. Did you feel that there was any pressure?
Absolutely, I felt pressure. In fact, there was a real strange situation, Tammy.
Okay.
Obviously, I was very outspoken, a real activist in
Yes.
support of our families and our colleagues, to support them, to help families. There was a situation where there was a complaint filed against me because I was too involved in with my colleagues in trying to be supportive and an activist. So they filed this complaint against me, and I had to go downtown and meet with my chain of command. And my chain of command investigated the complaint, Tammy. They said, you know what, Jerry, we got this formal complaint. You're being too involved, whatever that meant. And we actually sent someone out to the office, and we had them ask about you to see how your office was feeling about you and your involvement with the office. They found out that, hey, the office loved you, Jerry. You're doing a great job. And then my chain of command, my manager said, you know what? We looked into your work product to make sure you're doing your job. And she said, God, guess what? It seems like you do a really good job, Jerry. But then we consulted HR because, after all, it was a complaint. Well, Jerry, after we consulted HR and told them the facts, HR said, we need to write you up. We need to write you up. So Tammy,
it wasn't only, folks, just to let you know, it's not only the parents that are getting the kick in the you-know-what.
No, it
was
work.
Jerry. Whoever speaks up is going to get beat down. Folks, we have to go. I feel bad. There's never enough time. We're going to set up a blog and an email that Jerry will have access to. Let's get this conversation going. Let's get a community event. I've had some people say,
let's do it, Tammy.
okay. Folks,
Let's mobilize
thank you.
our community.
We love you. This is only beginning. The fight is on, and we're taking Jerry with us. Okay? Thank you, folks. We'll see you next week. Same time, same place. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the National Safe Child Show on UBN Radio. For past episodes, visit the archives on ubnradio.com. And for more information, go to nationalsafechildcoalition.com.